All right, this is Wednesday, and last night the second week of the college football playoff rankings has come out. Last week, I kind of gave my reaction on what those rankings really meant, and I kind of highlighted Clemson in that. So with this past week's LSU versus Alabama game, uh, I was curious to see what the committee what their stance was on Alabama and where they had them, and I felt like that was gonna be pretty telling on how they're judged based off of their schedule on that. And what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna take a look at teams 4 through 10, and then I'm throwing Baylor in there at 13, and just looking at kind of what it is. Because at this point, it looks like it's gonna be Ohio State, it looks like it's gonna be LSU, and it's going to be Clemson. Those are the three teams that I think have really separated themselves. Clemson, I just don't see them losing a game, that's why I think they're in there. Uh, this week, the number 4 team was Georgia, and we have Alabama 5, Oregon 6, Utah 7, Minnesota 8, Penn State 9, Oklahoma 10, and Baylor 13. And those are the teams that I think have a legit shot. I think these are the 6 or 7 teams that could go to the playoff. Florida and Auburn are 11 and 12. They've both got 2 losses. I don't think there's a shot that they get in unless it's just complete anarchy. The one takeaway that I have here is I don't think the committee really values the Big 12. And we see that with Oklahoma and Baylor. Oklahoma, despite just having 1 loss, they are the lowest rated 1-loss team in this big group at 10. Baylor is undefeated, and they are 13th. So that goes to tell you, and it tells me that if Oklahoma, obviously, if they have the toughest road to get into the top 4, and I think if Baylor loses 1 game, I don't think the committee is going to take them as a serious contender. They're going to have to win out. But what I want to do here is I'm going to take a look at each of these 7 teams and looking at their top 25 wins and what their remaining schedule is to kind of determine who we think is kind of up there. And we've seen so far with the committee, they don't pay as much attention to the losses. Okay? We see that right away. Number 4, Georgia. Number 5, Alabama. Georgia lost to South Carolina. South Carolina is not that great of a football team. They just lost to Appalachian State. They're rated 4th, whereas Alabama lost to the number 1 ranked team in the nation. It ended up being a 1-score game when it was all said and done. It was, in essence, it was probably a 2-score game without that end of the game touchdown. And they have Georgia ahead of them. So as we've seen over the past years, the committee doesn't necessarily care about who you lose to. It's all about who you've beaten. And so that's why I think looking at the top 25 current wins that each of these teams have and what their potential top 25 wins moving forward could be. Right now, Georgia's the number 4 team. They have 2 top 25 wins, Notre Dame and Florida. I don't think Notre Dame's worth that great of a win, but they're going to be a top 25 team at the end of the season. Florida, I don't think they're as good as they're hyped up to be. They're going to be a top 25 team. So Georgia's got 2 quality top 25 wins. Georgia plays Auburn this weekend. I think that is, and I put this in my weekly scouting guide up on NFLDraftGeek.com. That is a playoff eliminator game, in my opinion. Whoever loses that game, you're done and out of the playoffs. Even with 2 quality top 25 wins and, a second loss is going to be hard for Georgia to get into the college football playoff, even if they win the SEC championship game. But Georgia's got Auburn left. I don't think Auburn's going to be a top 25 team when it's all said and done. I don't care that they're 12. I don't see them beating Georgia. I could be surprised. I don't see them beating Alabama. That's going to make them a 4-loss team. Who knows? They'll still probably be rated in the top 25, the top 20 to 25 teams because the SEC always is. But I think for Georgia to get in, they're going to have to win the SEC championship. Alabama is number 5, and I'm really going to be fascinated to see where Alabama goes as the season continues to progress. Because right now they don't have a single top 25 win. Their best win to date is Texas A&M, who's not ranked in the top 25 of the playoff committee's rankings. They're not, and they don't have a remaining team. Auburn right now is rated, in the top 12. But like I said, I think they lose one or at least two more games. That's probably a 3-loss team. Potentially a 4-loss team is going to be their best game. At this point, they're playing catch up with LSU. I don't think they're going to make the SEC championship. So I think it'd be very hard for the committee to justify putting Alabama in as a 1-loss team, especially over a conference champion, because they haven't beaten anybody. It'd be different if they had some top 25 wins and they've shown that they've beaten these top teams, but we haven't seen that yet. And they're not going to play in that SEC championship game, so that's one less potential top game that they could win. Sure, they maybe pass the eyeball test, but I think other teams are going to have a better resume than them. Teams 6 and 7 are tied together because it's the two Pac-12 schools, Oregon and Utah, and they're both identical. Neither of them have a top 25 win, and their only remaining game that could be a top 25 win is that Pac-12 championship against each other. This one's going to be a tough because as we look at this, they're going to have that one remaining game that could put them in. Is that going to be enough to get them? If Georgia, runs the table, obviously as an SEC champ, they're going to get in there. But if they have 2 losses, you would think a 1-loss Oregon or a 1-loss Utah with that Pac-12 championship game would get over them. But their schedule is not doing them any favors. The Washingtons, the USCs, them not having success does not help either of those two teams. Minnesota made their debut in the top 25 or in the top 10, jumping all the way from 17 to 8 after their win over Penn State. That gives Minnesota their first top 25 win on the season. The reason why they were 17 and still undefeated is they hadn't really beat anybody yet. Now they've got that. Minnesota plays Iowa this weekend. Iowa's still ranked in the top 25. They're the 20th team in the college football playoff rankings. Iowa's probably going to lose. If Minnesota beats them, Iowa's might drop out of that, but I could definitely see them being a team that's rated like 24 and 25 at the end of the season. Minnesota still has Wisconsin. They're a team that's rated in the top 20. Also, they win those 2 games. They go to the Big Ten championship, and then they'll face off against Ohio State or Penn State. So they've got the most potential here to get 2 or 3 additional wins to boost the resume. If Minnesota drops maybe one of these games, still goes to the Big Ten championship and wins that, they're for sure in. If they win out in the regular season and then lose in a close game to Ohio State, they would have a strong argument to get in. Penn State's right behind them. I think Penn State has the toughest road, even though they are 9th. Yes, they have an Iowa win and a Michigan win that are top 25. They still play Ohio State, so if they win that game, they're in the driver's seat for the Big Ten East, and then they'd go on to potentially have a rematch with Minnesota. I just don't see them beating Ohio State, and so they'll be a 2-loss team and miss out on the playoffs. And then that leaves us to Oklahoma and Baylor, who I talked about at the beginning. I think Oklahoma still has a shot, but they're going to need some of those other Big Ten teams to give them to stay in those rankings, and I'm not quite sure that they could do those. At this moment, Georgia seems like it could be that the 4th team, especially if they win out. But I don't see them winning the SEC championship, and that's going to give them 2 losses. So I think what that ends up doing is if Oregon or the Oregon-Utah game could be the team that gets in, I think they would have a little bit better of a resume than in Alabama. Alabama might have the eyeball test, but I think Oregon having a better win on their resume, being a conference champion. Utah, the same thing. I think that will get them in. I wouldn't be shocked if Alabama gets in. I don't like it. I don't agree with that. I could see Oklahoma being a dark horse starting to move up as they starting to win a few more games. But at this point, I think it's the Pac-12 team that sneaks in if they win out.